Joe Biden. His full name is Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. Biden was born on November 20, 1942, in Scranton, Pennsylvania. His father is Joseph Biden Sr. His mother is Catherine Eugenia Finnegan. He was born the eldest of 4 siblings. And he grew up in New Castle County, Delaware. His family is Irish Catholic. His father was very wealthy in his 20s and was passionate about hobbies such as yachting, hunting, and automobiles. By the time their first son, Joe, was born, however, he had failed in several businesses, which forced the Biden family to live with Mr. and Mrs. Finnegan, Joe's maternal grandparents, for several years, and the family had a difficult life. Later, during the economic downturn of the 1950s, his father could no longer get enough work to make a living, so they moved to Claymont, Delaware when Biden was 10. He then moved to Wilmington, New Castle County, Delaware, where his father worked for an air conditioning and heating boiler cleaning company, and stayed there until he graduated from high school. Wilmington is where Biden later practiced law for the first time. Later, his father got a job as a used car salesman, and the Biden family lived a stable life as a middle-class family. Biden enrolled at Archmere Academy, a private Catholic school in Claymont, where he remained until his graduation in 1961. While in school, he was passionate about American football and baseball. In American football, in particular, he was a member of his high school's American football team and played an active role in developing the team from a long losing streak to a strong team that went undefeated in its final year of competition. Even in college, he became obsessed with American football. He was also active in political activities, participating in a sit-in against racial discrimination at a theater in Wilmington. Although he was a mediocre and unremarkable student in terms of academics, Biden was a student of leadership. After graduating from Archmere Academy in 1961, he went to the University of Delaware in Newark, where he majored in history and political science. Initially, as in his time at Archmere Academy, he was passionate about American football and played for the Delaware Fightin' Blue Hens, a team at the University of Delaware. However, during his third year of university, he was forced to give up his plans to play for the varsity team in order to spend more time with his girlfriend, who lives outside of Delaware. Thus, perhaps because of his enthusiasm for sports and dating friends and lovers, he did not do well academically and graduated in 1965 with a bachelor's degree in history and political science, but not very well, 506th out of 688 students. But friends were rather surprised by Biden's talent for cramming studies, he said. He then went on to Syracuse University School of Law. During his first year at the school, it was discovered that he had plagiarized 5 pages from a 15-page article in the Law Review in 1965, and although the school revoked his credits for the course as a plagiarism case, he was not expelled, and Biden received his credits the following year, 1966. Biden denies any malice was intended in this incident. While in law school in 1966 he met and married his first wife, Nelia Hunter. He and Nelia later had 2 sons and a daughter. Also during the Vietnam War, Biden received 5 draft deferments between 1963, when he was in college, and 1968, when he was in law school, because of a history of asthma as a boy. For this reason, he did not serve in the Vietnam War. He received his J.D. in 1968 and joined the Delaware State Bar Association in 1969, the year after he completed his studies, and practiced law in Wilmington. He suffered from stuttering since childhood, and it took him until his early 20s to overcome it. He overcame his stuttering by continually reciting poetry in front of a mirror. He also became an abstainer because a close relative suffered from alcoholism. In 1969, their first son, Bo, was born. In 1970, their second son, Hunter, was born. In the same year, he was elected to the New Castle County Council in Delaware. At this time, he was in the early stages of his law practice. In 1971, their first daughter, Naomi, was born. He ran as a Democrat in the November 1972 Senate election. In November, at the age of 29, he was elected to the Delaware Senate, becoming the 5th youngest senator in U.S. history. On December 18, a few weeks after the election, his wife and daughter were killed in a car accident while out Christmas shopping. Biden once tried to withdraw from the senatorial post because of the nursing and care of his sons, but Michael Mansfield, then Democratic Senate Majority Leader, convinced him not to withdraw, and he decided to become a senator, taking the oath of office on January 5, 1973, from the sick room of his son. In January 1973, he began his normal activities as a member of Congress, as did other members of Congress. While most members of Congress normally reside in Washington, D.C., when they become members of Congress, he commuted by train every day for his sons, an hour and a half each way, between his home outside of Wilmington and Washington, D.C. His first 10 years in the Senate were spent on arms control. In 1974, Biden's career was broadened and his name recognition increased, as he was named one of Time magazine's 200 Faces for the Future, both in and out of Congress. In his personal life, he married his second wife, Jill Jacobs, in June 1977, with whom he later had a daughter. He was re-elected in the 1978 election. After Congress failed to ratify the SALT II treaty signed in 1979 by Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev and President Jimmy Carter, Biden met with Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko to communicate American concerns and secured changes that addressed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee's objections. When Republican President Ronald Reagan insisted on a broad interpretation of SALT for his Strategic Defense Initiative, Biden called for strict adherence to the treaty. He also drew attention at a Senate hearing when he accused Secretary of State George Shultz of supporting the Reagan administration's support for South Africa and promoting apartheid. In January 1981, he became the ranking member of the United States Senate Committee on the Judiciary. In the same year, a daughter, Ashley, was born. He joined the ranks of veteran legislators, winning 3 elections in the 1984 election. He assisted in the passage of the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984 as the floor leader on the Democratic side. The law later became stricter, and in 2019 Biden reflected to himself that it was a big mistake to pass it. These laws include the Federal Assault Weapons Ban and the Violence Against Women Act, which he considers the most important piece of legislation he has been involved in. In January 1987, he became the first Senate Judiciary Committee chairman to serve on a standing committee. He served in this position until January 1995. He dealt with issues related to drug policy, crime prevention, and civil liberties. In June, he announced his intention to run in the Democratic primary for the presidential election the following year. He was considered a strong candidate because of his personality, his name recognition as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee over the Robert Bork Supreme Court nomination, and his appeal to baby boomers. Had he been elected president, he would have been the second youngest president after John F. Kennedy. He was the leading candidate until the first quarter of 1987, when in September he was suspected of plagiarizing a speech by British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock, followed by allegations of plagiarizing his thesis as a student, and he officially admitted the plagiarism, apologized to Syracuse University Law School, and withdrew his candidacy before the presidential nominating primary election began. In February 1988, Biden suffered from neck pain and was taken by ambulance to an army hospital. It was caused by a ruptured cerebral aneurysm and he underwent brain surgery. During his recovery, he suffered a pulmonary embolism and suffered serious complications. In May, he underwent surgery for a second brain aneurysm and returned to the Senate 7 months after his hospitalization. He opposed the January 1991 Gulf War and supported NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe and its intervention in the Yugoslav conflict of the 1990s. He became interested in the Yugoslav conflict after hearing about Serbian atrocities in the Croatian conflict. When the Bosnia-Herzegovina conflict erupted, it was Biden who first advocated a lift and strike policy of lifting the arms embargo and providing arms and training to Bosnian Muslims, while supporting them with NATO air strikes and investigating war crimes. However, both the George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton administrations were reluctant to implement this policy, fearing that the Balkans would become entangled. In 1992, he wrote an amendment to the lift and strike policy that would force the Bush administration to provide arms to the Bosnians. In April 1993, Biden had a tense 3-hour meeting with Slobodan Milosevic, president of the Republic of Serbia, and told Milosevic, "I think you are a war criminal. You should be put on trial." In 1994, the lift and strike policy was changed to the somewhat softer language favored by the Clinton administration, but a year later, a stronger proposal sponsored by Bob Dole and Joe Lieberman was signed. Biden described influencing policy toward the Balkans in the mid-1990s as the proudest moment of my public life. In 1997, he became the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and was its chairman from 2001 to 2003, when Democrats held the Senate majority, and again from 2007 to 2009. His stance on foreign affairs was based on liberal internationalism. He also had a strong connection with the Republican Party and at times opposed the Democratic Party's policies. During the Kosovo War in March 1999, he supported NATO airstrikes against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Biden, working with Republican John McCain, urged President Clinton to use all necessary forces, including ground troops, to block Yugoslavia's policy toward Kosovo's Albanians and confront Milosevic. On September 11, 2001, the September 11 attacks occurred in New York City and the Pentagon, etc. He supported the Afghan operation in the aftermath of the attacks. In 2002, as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Biden voted in favor of a resolution authorizing the use of military force against Iraq on October 16 of that year. After the Democrats fell to the minority party in the November 2002 midterm elections, he left the Foreign Relations chairmanship in January 2003, when the new Congress convened, and returned as the ranking minority party member. He was motivated to run for the presidency in November 2004, but ultimately decided against it. The November 2006 midterm elections returned the Democrats to the majority party. He held the position of Foreign Relations Committee chairman for the second time since January 2007. At the same time, he chaired the Subcommittee on Crime and Narcotics, which is linked to the Judiciary Committee. He was particularly active in the Foreign Relations Committee, both as a leader of that committee and as a diplomatic connoisseur. Also in the Senate plenary session, in relation to the stalled Iraq policy, he and Republican Senator Sam Brownback passed a non-legally binding Iraq partition resolution in September 2007. He also opposed the deployment of more U.S. troops in Iraq. In 2008, he challenged the 2008 U.S. presidential election, his second, but Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton outspent the other two candidates, and he withdrew in January due to lack of campaign funds. During this presidential campaign, however, Biden came to be admired by Obama, who asked him for advice on national security policy and foreign policy. He resigned from the Senate after being elected vice president alongside Barack Obama in the 2008 United States presidential election. He was re-elected 6 times and was the 4th longest-serving senator. He served 6 consecutive terms in the U.S. Senate from January 1973 to January 2009, working on foreign affairs, criminal justice, and drug issues, and was chairman of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary and chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. He has established credibility across party lines as a coordinating politician who values policy implementation. According to members of the Obama administration, Vice President Biden's role in the administration seemed to be to try to get others to defend their positions by daring to disagree. Obama also said, "The best thing about Joe is that when we all get together, he forces everyone to think, to stand their ground, to look at things from all angles. That's very important to me." Obama appointed Biden to head up Iraq in June 2008, and since then Biden has visited Iraq once every 2 months, becoming a key government official to convey the U.S. government's message to the Iraqi government. Through 2012, Biden visited Iraq 8 times, but when U.S. troops withdrew from Iraq in 2011, Biden's involvement in Iraq also decreased. In September, the Lehman shock occurred, triggered by the bankruptcy of the investment bank Lehman Brothers. In 2009, he oversaw infrastructure spending to combat the recession caused by the Lehman Brothers collapse. When the Democrats lost the November 2010 midterm elections, Biden's role became even more important, as he had long-time connections with Republicans in Congress. It was Biden who led the Senate passage of the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. Biden's negotiations with congressional Republicans also helped the Obama administration pass legislation such as the Tax Relief Act of 2010, which resolved the tax deadlock, the Budget Control Act of 2011, which resolved the debt ceiling crisis, and the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012, which addressed the impending fiscal cliff. In December, he worked out a compromise with Republicans that included an extension of the Bush tax cuts. In 2011, U.S. troops withdrew from Iraq. He supported NATO's 2011 military intervention in Libya. He favored having closer economic ties with Russia and supported Russia's accession to the WTO. Several reports indicate that Biden was opposed to the operation to kill bin Laden, which was carried out in May 2011. The declining approval ratings of the Obama administration led some to suggest that the vice presidential candidate should be replaced by Hillary Clinton instead of Biden in the November 2012 presidential election. But Obama continued to nominate Biden as his vice presidential candidate and was re-elected. Obama and Biden served 2 terms of 8 years. After the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in December 2012, Biden led the Gun Violence Task Force, a special team established to address the causes of gun violence in the United States. On December 31, he and Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell reached an agreement to avoid the fiscal cliff. When Russia forced the annexation of Crimea in March 2014, the Obama administration supported the Ukrainian government and provided support for Ukraine and imposed Russian economic sanctions. In May 2015, his oldest son, Beau Biden, died of a brain tumor. In December, Biden gave a speech in support of Ukraine to the Ukrainian parliament. Biden is also a familiar face to South American leaders, having visited the region 16 times during his tenure as vice president. Biden's candidacy was discussed for the 2016 United States presidential election because Obama could not run due to term limits, and a self-drafted political action committee was formed. Due to the disappointment of the loss of his eldest son, Beau, he decided not to run for President of the United States in 2016. He and Obama did not initially express support for either candidate in the Democratic primary, but announced their support for Hillary Clinton on June 9, 2016, after she secured the nomination. On January 12, 2017, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama for his service as vice president. Biden, who had not been informed in advance of the award, burst into tears and delivered a 20-minute impromptu speech. On June 1, 2017, he announced the creation of the Political Action Committee American Possibilities. In April 2019, he officially announced his intention to run for President of the United States in 2020. The Democratic primary election for President of the United States began in February 2020. Biden won his first victory in his fourth race in the South Carolina primaries on the 29th, when he was expected to lose if he did not win. On March 1, just before Super Tuesday, Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar announced their withdrawal from the primary campaign, and on the following day, March 2, both announced their support for Biden. This has left the centrist Democrats united under Biden to face the leftist Sanders. Michael Bloomberg also withdrew on March 4 and announced his support for Biden, and Elizabeth Warren withdrew on March 5, but she did not specify whom she would support. Tulsi Gabbard, who announced her withdrawal on March 19, also expressed support for Biden. His last remaining opponent, Sanders, also announced his withdrawal on April 8 and announced his support for Biden on April 13. This ensured Biden's nomination. After the candidates were decided, former President Obama announced his support for Biden on April 14, received an endorsement from Warren, who had not yet announced her stance, on April 15, and received an endorsement from the previous candidate, Hillary Clinton, on April 18, thus setting up a party for the lineup. In August, he announced his choice of Kamala Harris, a non-white woman of half black and half Indian descent, as his vice presidential candidate. Furthermore, he was officially nominated as the party's presidential candidate at the Democratic National Convention and delivered his nomination acceptance speech on March 20. The pledges include a federal minimum wage of $15 per hour, investment in green energy, federal funding to promote the purchase of American products, expansion of Obamacare, criminal justice reform to correct racial discrimination, repeal of tax breaks for the wealthy and corporations under the Trump administration, repeal of immigration control policies under the Trump administration, a return to the Paris Agreement, which the Trump administration withdrew from, diplomacy to strengthen relations with NATO and other allies to counter China by abolishing the unilateralism of Trump's foreign policy, student loan forgiveness and free college, and providing all citizens with the opportunity to learn before elementary school. He also called for mandatory mask use on a nationwide basis and for measures to combat the new corona, which would provide financial and human resources support to local governments to increase their testing capacity and expand testing, which was well received by infectious disease experts. The presidential primary election was held on November 3, and on November 7, the major media reported that Biden was assured of victory in the close states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and that he was assured of winning the election because the number of electors he was assured of winning reached a majority. He was confirmed as the next president-elect with a majority of 306 electors. The transition process had been stalled because President Trump had not accepted defeat and had instructed agencies not to cooperate with the transition, but there was widespread concern that a delay in the process would adversely affect national security, so the General Services Administration approved the transition process on November 23. In November, the new administration announced the creation of a new coronavirus advisory committee to lead the new administration's efforts to combat new coronaviruses. In December, he received a public vaccination with the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer and BioNTech. A joint session of the House and Senate was scheduled to begin on January 6, 2021, to officially finalize the results of the earlier electoral vote, but shortly after the Congress began, some Trump supporters who did not approve of the election results broke into the federal parliament and occupied the chamber. The commotion caused a temporary suspension of the Congress, but it resumed on the evening of the 6th after the National Guard was mobilized to remove the Trump supporters who had broken in, and the results of the Electoral College vote were approved early on the 7th, officially confirming Biden's election. Democrats won the January 5 election runoff for Georgia's 2 U.S. Senate seats, giving Democrats a majority in the Senate, including the Speaker's decision on Kamala Harris, the next Vice President of the United States. This is the first time since 2009 that Democrats have controlled the White House in both the House and Senate. On January 20, Biden became the 46th President of the United States. He is the first Catholic president since John F. Kennedy and the oldest president of all time at 78 when he took office. He indicated a shift to more environmentally oriented policies, including a return to the Paris Agreement, revocation of approval to build a crude oil pipeline from Canada to the Midwest, suspension of leasing activities for oil and gas development in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Northeast Alaska, and a directive to consider reviewing fuel efficiency standards and methane emission regulations for automobiles. He also rescinded the withdrawal from the WHO, mandated the wearing of masks and social distancing in federal buildings, and ordered the lifting of the state of emergency declaration that had been the basis for redirecting federal funds to the construction of a border wall with Mexico. On January, he signed a presidential decree strengthening the operation of the Buy American Act that give preference to American products in government procurement. He also signed a series of presidential decrees on climate change measures, including a ban on new drilling for oil and natural gas on public lands and doubling offshore wind power generation by 2030. He also signed 2 presidential decrees to expand health care coverage for citizens, repairing the damage done by the previous Trump administration. In March, he signed into law the $1.9 trillion new Coronavirus Additional Economic Measures Act. The pledge of 100 million vaccinations within 100 days was achieved in about 60 days. He unveiled a $2.25 trillion infrastructure plan, dubbed the American Jobs Plan. Biden said the plan, if enacted, would create 19 million jobs. In April, he announced the first gun control policy aimed at, among other things, regulating homemade guns, which lack serial numbers and are difficult to trace. He announced that troops stationed in Afghanistan would be withdrawn by September. Biden announced new sanctions against Russia, including restrictions on purchases of newly issued Russian government bonds beginning in June in retaliation for cyber terrorism and attempts to disrupt the U.S. presidential election, which are believed to have been carried out by Russia. In June, he signed into law the Juneteenth National Independence Day bill, making June 19 a federal holiday to commemorate June 19, 1865, when the Emancipation Proclamation was read in Texas. On August 31, U.S. forces withdrew from Afghanistan. The United States was to surrender Afghanistan to the Taliban. In September, as a new security framework against China, the UK and Australia established AUKUS to exchange military information and technology with each other. This led to the US government providing Australia with nuclear submarine technology, allowing Australia to build its own nuclear submarines. He promoted the American Infrastructure Investment Act, which allocates federal funds to improve highways, roads, bridges, urban public transit, and passenger rail, provide clean drinking water, and develop a nationwide network of high-speed internet access and electric vehicle charging spots. And on November 6, the House of Representatives passed the bill with the support of some Republican members despite the opposition of some Democratic members. On December 7, he held an online meeting with Putin over the issue of Russia's termination of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border. Biden warned that Russia would respond with economic sanctions if it launched a military offensive, and Putin confronted him, claiming that NATO was the one building up its military forces on Ukrainian territory and near Russia's borders. On December 9 and 10, 111 democracies, including major European countries, Japan, and Taiwan, were invited to participate in the Democracy Summit, a 2-day online international conference to counter the hegemony of despotic states such as China and Russia. Regarding the massive tornadoes that struck the southern and midwestern United States on December 12 and 13, killing 90 people, the company has indicated that it will do its utmost to provide relief and recovery assistance to the victims. On February 24, Russian President Vladimir Putin actually launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. On February 26, it decided to provide an additional $350 million worth of weapons to Ukrainian forces engaged in warfare with Russian troops. On February 27, the United States reached an agreement with Europe to impose sanctions that would bar Russian banks from the international payments network SWIFT. On February 28, the Russian central bank effectively froze dollar assets held in the U.S. as a financial sanction. On March 2, the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. also delivered a General State of the Union address to a joint session of the House and Senate, with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine sitting next to him. However, he reiterated his denial of sending U.S. troops to Ukraine, a non-aligned country, and explained that the deployments he is making in Eastern Europe are to protect NATO allies such as Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states from Russian aggression. On March 8, he signed a presidential decree banning all imports of Russian crude oil, natural gas, and coal. The decarbonization Biden administration, which has been cool to the oil industry, has changed its position against the backdrop of oil supply concerns caused by the crisis in Ukraine. He began calling for and promoting increased shale oil production in the industry. U.S. crude oil production has been rising rapidly recently. Each year on December 18, Biden does no work at all in memory of his first wife, Naylia, who passed away in an automobile accident, and his eldest daughter, Naomi.